We are filming for Hamilton College and developing a jazz archive with America's greatest jazz musicians. We have with us a fabulous artist on clarinet, Kenny Davern.
Hello, Michael. Nice to
No,
see you.
right. Tell us a little bit about the concert that you played last night. It had all the things in it that I try to teach my jazz class.
Well,
Let me give you what I mean.
okay.
You played themes, you played backgrounds. Each one of you got a chance to be featured. You played ensemble passages.
Well, that's what the music is about, basically. I think that as far as the tunes, I mean, they're generally your basic song forms, 32 bars, what have you, from a period of music that probably from 1910 to about 1940, this phenomena occurred in the history of music. It never had occurred before, arias and stuff, maybe little songs, but never where the entire public has been able to sing a verse and then probably the words to every stanza of the tune. And that never happened before or after. You know, like we're back to square A today where there is no song melodic form. You know, I mean, if you take Andrew Lloyd Webber, nobody can sing past 4 bars of his music. That's it. Even I doubt if they could even sing 4 bars of it. But yeah, I mean, so we're really dealing in a time capsule of music, you know, which no longer exists. Which probably the greatest artists and practitioners of this kind of art form honed and crafted their trade.
Would you even say that at that particular time that jazz was America's popular music? Or did that particular form that the music found itself in, how did it communicate to an audience better than some of the songs today?
Well, they could anticipate and memorize the melody and the lyrics, which is far superior, as far as I'm concerned, to the so-called originals that are being produced by everybody almost on the scene today. I don't know, I want to do my own things. I only might do my original pieces, which is fine. I mean, you could do that. I mean, once I talked to Sonny Rollins about the fact that he played, I went to see him at the old 5-spot, and he'd taken I Got Rhythm, and he played the melody at least a dozen times without changing any notes of the melody, but changing it rhythmically, and to prove a point. So a guy next to me, sitting there wearing shades at midnight in a darkened club, which was the de rigueur of the time, talk about the 50s. I said, why isn't he playing such and such, you know, whether it was Charlie Parker's head or Dizzy Gillespie's head or whoever's head on the tune, you know? And I said, well, I Got Rhythm is a far superior melody. You know, people can identify with that. Sonny's doing a number on it, so to speak. Oh. You see what I mean? Oh, I hope that answered that question.
People need points of reference, though.
Yes, absolutely. In every walk of life.
Tell us about the clarinet, because it's artists of your ilk that keep this instrument in the forefront.
You think so? Some people might say the opposite.
Well, keep it alive. Let's say keep it alive.
Some people might say we're helping to bury it. It's an instrument which could go the way of the oboe d'amore or the viola da gamba. It's a very difficult instrument. To quote Jerry Dodgen, it was invented by 2 guys who didn't know each other. There's no rhyme or reason for it. You must have to be some kind of a sadist, masochist sadist to continue on this instrument. It's not the voice of bebop, but it's not the voice of of today, so to speak, even though there are more commercials on television I've noticed recently that use clarinets, you know, sort of in the background, ever since the Benny Goodman Chase Manhattan ad, you know. It has the most amount to offer of all the woodwinds in the sense that it has almost the same range as a violin. It has almost 4.5 octaves, 4 octaves, you know, which is a great deal of span, you know, as opposed to 2.5 of the saxophone and whatever you can get out of the trumpet, you know, and probably 2.5 out of the oboe, and a little bit more out of the flute. But it's too difficult an instrument, and not everybody wants to devote themselves to that one thing, to do that, because also it doesn't lend itself very well, as you've noticed, to so-called modern jazz. It just doesn't, it's not that kind of an instrument. It's not the kind of voice for the music, whereas a saxophone is, most brass instruments are, and now they don't even call a pianist, they call him a keyboard player, which means you can do. Yes, exactly. You know, whatever. So I don't know, I grew up loving the instrument. That's all I can say. And whatever it is, whatever doubling I did on the way up, it was always with the clarinet as being the instrument that I was going to focus on from then on, you know, for the rest of my life, whether I made money or I didn't.
But you have a very distinct voice on that instrument.
Yeah.
You've taken that instrument past any generic conception into this elusive category that all musicians seek for called voice. And you have that.
Thank you. That, I think, is a prerequisite for anybody doing anything, is to, quote, put their John Hancock, you know, once you've seen that signature, it's forever imprinted on your mind. And I think the only way you can ever establish yourself, instead of sounding like the cookie cutter, falling into that syndrome, is you must take it upon yourself to bite the bullet and say, for better or for worse, this is the way I sound. This is the sound that I make, and you must stand by it. And that's why this, you know, you're stealing my music, or this is my... If you can make your own noise on the instrument and make your own sound, which is instantly recognizable within, let's say, 4 bars, then, you know, that's it. Then you ain't stealing anybody's anything. You might be a composite, or, you know, a storehouse, or a bank, you know, depository of all you've heard, all that's come before, all you've chosen to absorb. But once music is out there, you can do this. You can. And I think that's the most important thing, is to get what you've listened to, what impressed you most, what moved you most, and make it into your own thing, you know. When Louis Armstrong died, Walter Cronkite, when he was anchor on CBS, had Dizzy Gillespie and Miles Davis and I think Buck Clayton and Bobby Hackett, to name a few. This was in 1971, and he asked them all, how did Louis Armstrong influence you? So everybody said, well, you know, like Miles Davis says, you know, we'd all be digging ditches if it wasn't for Louis, you know, etc. And he got to Bobby Hackett. He said, how did he influence you? He says, well, he says, with that New England accent, and he says, well, he says, I spent half my life, he says, stealing everything I could from him. He said, and the other half covering it up.
Oh, that's great.
But that's it. I mean, nobody, it ain't, no one person can claim anything. I mean, once it's out there, it becomes everybody's.
It's public domain.
Correct. It becomes music, and music is for everybody, for all.
I wanted to ask you, you have a gift, and I'm going to kind of give a setting in which this gift manifests itself, and then I want you to talk about it. That is, not every musician, irregardless of their ability to be a great soloist or even to be a great arranger, has the gift to be a band leader. And you're a natural band leader. Without even thinking about it. Talk about that for a minute.
That's very interesting, Mike. Thank you. I say thank you because I enjoy being in control. I think that's number one. You have to enjoy being in control. Um, you have to really believe that the guys that you're playing with will allow you to be in control, you know, and they won't go kibitzing around or. Um, but I think that you have to be an extrovert, which is either you're an introvert or an extrovert, you know, and you can't do it half-heartedly, otherwise it fails.
Mm-hmm.
And the ability to conceive the natural beginning of a tune and how to end it is what it's probably about. You know, like how much time should you allow, or allot, a given piece, you know. For the most part, though, like you said last night, well, last night was not really a good example of what it was I can do as a leader, because I was really not the leader. I was more or less flung into it. You know, I didn't really, whether you have Scott and Warren and Ralph and the guys, they're all natural leaders. Each one wants to be the leader, but they're all being very reticent about taking the bull by the horns and doing it. But that's why I prefer to work really, and there's no reflection on their abilities and what they do, in as small a group as possible, trio, quartet, quintet, when it has a guitar added or whatever. Because then I can control the situation. And I think it's a need to control and not be controlled. Maybe that, you know, and whichever, however, and also your presentation of how you talk to people.
That's what I was going to talk to you about too, because you have a specific stage presence. And I want you to talk about this because, you know, this music is a combination. When you play the blues, there's some sorrow in there, but it can't be 100% sorrow. And then, of course, when I see your stage demeanor, there's some humor in there, but it's not trite. It's somewhere in the middle. Talk to us about that. Because you have that's what I meant, that you have a certain stage presence, that mixture of humor and wit and sometimes even melancholy.
You've got, yes, you got two things in there. You've got, in your statement, you've got blues, which is sad, but then again, blues can be like Dusty Young, you know, it could be frivolous, it could be cheerful, it could be medium fast, medium slow, very slow, dirge blues, up-tempo blues. You know, there are a lot of people who didn't know that the blues could be more than one, you know, like Weltschmerz, you know, Weltschmerzig, you know, like, which means, for those of you who are out there in Radio Land, the weight of the world is on you. The blues is a natural thing as far as a feeling goes. I mean, either some people can play and or sing the blues, or they can't. And this is beyond racial things. I mean, Marian Anderson, when she sang a St. Louis Woman with her diamond ring, I mean, had about as much to do with blues as The Man in the Moon. But I'm deviating. Blues, the basis of all music, as far as I'm concerned, at least this kind of music that we're talking about. When I was a kid in high school, we didn't know songs. We knew 12-bar blues, and we used to play it, like you said, sometimes very like a dirge, just like some kind of a heartfelt ballad, but only, you know. But some people, you know, you play a ballad with a blues feel, and then maybe they want to do a Lindy, so you played a blues brighter. Want to do a real fast one, played a fast blues, and maybe you threw in a song. You see, but for the most part, that was my upbringing as a kid, playing blues. Now, that's part one, as I see it, as I perceived it. The second part, humor. When I went to England for one of the first times I went over there, I discovered that if you were very serious with those people who were there, sitting there like this, arms crossed. When I see people with arms crossed, I know the defenses are up. Body language, exactly right. And they're sitting there like this. Well, let's see. Let me see what you do. You know, who are you? So I think I said something to the tune of, "Evening, ladies and gentlemen, it sure is nice to be here. Hope you have a good time tonight." You know, and I looked around and sort of like, and they fell out on the floor, you know, because they were expecting, you know, somebody to say, "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to play now a number for you. We hope for musical edification. We hope that you enjoy it." So I just, "Well, every now and now, folks, you know, nice to see you all out there having such a nice time," you know, and that was the end of that.
The Gomer Pyle routine.
That's the Gomer Pyle routine, you know, yeah. Vern will leave the light on for you, you know. And they didn't expect that. And I think that you have to disarm your audience in order to just, okay, let's get rid of all this nonsense, and then maybe we can partake in a rapport, you know. But if you don't, but if you feel that freeze or that chill, you can't really loosen up and play.
Or it may take you 3 tunes to get through it.
If it takes that long, Michael, I think it's the end of me. By then I'm shattered. It's got to come pretty quick, you know. You're right, though. It does. I can't say that it happens right away, because sometimes you look out there, you don't really feel like bantering with them. You just want to play and see what we got up on the bandstand, because you just shook hands 5 minutes ago, and you don't know if you're going to be able to do anything before you want to make friends with the audience, or the musicians, for that matter.
And isn't it funny sometimes how that you can play the exact same notes and play with the exact same energy, but if people are not ready or willing to receive what you're doing, the level of edification that they get is minuscule, or much lesser by comparison than if they're free and open and looking forward to a positive experience.
That's true. Absolutely right. And so the hard part is then, well, you know, the second part of your question earlier about the blues, the music is a form of entertainment. I mean, maybe not the music, but there should be I mean, the music can be deadly serious. Witness those films that Louis Armstrong made in Denmark in 1932. I mean, here you see this guy coming out, you know, kind of like looking very old Southern relaxed style, and all of a sudden he picks up that horn and they pan in on him, and those eyes are like 2 pieces of steel. I leaped away from the screen when I first saw it, because I said, this guy, he is deadly in earnest. He may be kibitzing up there, but those eyes are telling me, get out of my way. This is it. You've seen those films.
Yes.
Louis, I think he was at Tivoli Gardens in Copenhagen. Incredible, incredible films. I mean, I think he was probably the biggest influence on my playing. I think he might have been the biggest influence. In fact, I don't think, I know he was the greatest influence in the entire scope of the century's music. And there hasn't been anything better than what it is he did on any given composition, the way he interpreted it. Some people would disagree with me. I mean, I know in some parts of the world, music began with John Coltrane. Now, you know, that, to me, I think it sort of ended with John Coltrane. It not began. There are some people that look back. I heard on the radio the other night, just going from airport to home or whatever, some guy was talking about, well, he was going to go back to the roots of it all. You know, he was talking about people I never heard of. And then he was saying, well, really, if you really want to go back to the roots, then we'll go back to John Coltrane, Miles Davis, and Charlie Parker. I mean, he just left out perhaps 50 years of wonderful stuff that helped form these guys into where they were, what they took it to, finally. And that was very distressing.
I wanted to ask you, you talked about Coltrane, and of course, his main innovation was what we call the sheets of sound, to the place where, and of course, you know, he began to go off into the free jazz movement and all that. What is happening now in jazz is there any movement now that you see in any way that is equal to any of the great artists or great movements that that have shaped jazz in the past, or is it at a standstill?
I think it's an absolute, I think you said it. It's a standstill. It's actually a state, perhaps, of decomposition, because the other night I heard, again, airport to home, a chance to scan the airwaves. I heard a concert from, I think it was either Carnegie Hall or Lincoln Center, Wynton Marsalis, and they were playing the music of Jelly Roll Morton, which is what I cut my eye teeth on, so to speak, when I was growing up. And I mean, I really love that music. I could tell you the alternate takes, you know, that kind of thing. That's how ingrained and how much I loved Jelly Roll's music as a kid, and I still do. And I heard them, when I say them, that whole group of guys who formed that organization, who are like, what would you call them? Part of the repertory company, take that music and actually decimate it to the point where I was outraged that they should play this music so badly. And even if they read the notes, they were being played without really the true passion that the music had, and the musicianship was noticeably inferior to the original. Now, if you can't do it as good as the original, do it different then, but don't try to do it the same way and have it fall short of the mark, you see. And I just said, they're making a travesty of the music that I grew up and loved. You know, the same as using alternate takes as supposing you were a kid and you never heard this stuff. It always takes some recording that goes wham, you know, that gives you the emotional hook, so to speak, that where you bite, you say, that's it. This music is it. And it comes at different times. Hopefully it comes at an earlier age. Then you have much more time to develop and, you know, and to wig things out. But I've heard them use, even Louis Armstrong, second and third takes, which were not the ones that the artist intended to be issued. And being the artist is now deceased and has no representation of his own music, people seem to feel free that they can take a second or third or what they call alternate take and use it as the one that was set up as the standard, the one that grabbed me, the one that said, when I hear this played, this song played, that's a definitive version of it. It will never be better than that, and that's what I love about this particular thing. And then they play one that was a couple of flubs and a couple of goofs, and which is not bad. I mean, but it didn't have exact placement and the articulation of that particular those notes, and to make up this masterpiece that is deservedly belongs to be raved about, but they go and they decimate that too by playing a take that wouldn't grab the, let's say, the young kid that I was today, coming along, and it wouldn't grab him. It wouldn't send out that message that that original one did.
Let me ask you something on this. And is that all about money and just selling records?
Yes and no. I think a lot of it is ignorance. I just think somebody's out there, some of those DJs who can't pronounce even half the names of the guys, the sidemen, correctly. You should hear some of it. You probably have heard some of that one. You should go cringe. You go, ugh. What's this guy doing? No, I think that some of those people just really don't know the difference, or they themselves have not been hooked on it, or on a particular tune, or version rather, not tune. I think, yes, in a way it might be that they'll try to capitalize on alternate takes and stuff. But if you don't know the original take, the alternate take wouldn't make any difference to you. So I don't think I don't think money is really the thing, because first of all, the majority of people who have the records started collecting them when they were on 78s, as I did. And then they went to LP, and then you grab them in an LP form. And then from EP and LP, and then now CD. And I found myself so almost befuddled when I walk into a large record store, and I see like 10 10 different versions, I mean, of the same piece on different labels and pirated labels, and I don't know which one to buy because I don't know what it's going to sound like. What's the transfer like?
Mm-hmm.
And stuff like that. And if you grow up listening to the originals as they were issued, you know, I'm not talking in the time when they were issued, but you know, on the original intent, like a wind-up phonograph and stuff like that, and you hear the way they sound, that stays with you. It really gets you here.
Mm-hmm.
And then you hear how it's been convoluted from generation to generation, until you wonder, like, what did this thing really sound like, you know? And that's something that deserves some studying, really. The tragedy here, I think, is we are in the wrong place at the wrong time, in the sense that we wouldn't have this problem if we were born, say, for myself, 20 years earlier than I was born. You, a great deal more, because we're witnessing the end of music as we love it. I think, for instance, you got one man with a synthesizer can produce 4 times the amount of volume in a given space, like vis-a-vis a ballroom, that in 1938 it took 16 men, well-trained, practicing bunnies, you know, and you know, section rehearsals, and okay, fellas, to get that kind of intensity and volume into a ballroom, which, you know, because all kids are the same, no matter whether it was 1938 or 1998. They all really are, you know, they're morons, you know, they really are. But it just so happens the music that the intensity of the you know, the working up and the pitch of music then, I think, was superior to, let's say, the same amount of intensity given off at a rock concert. Well, actually, it's more intensity given off at a rock concert, but it's a similar kind of frenzy. Kids need to congregate and do tribal things, you know, tribal rituals, and, you know, like a rite of spring, you know, sacrificial rites and stuff. That's what it all is. It really is, you know, and they have to congregate together, and, you know, somehow or other, and maybe it's like some primordial thing where there's a sense of smell. That's an you know what I mean? But as the same kids today, as it was supposedly back in 38 or 28 or whenever you talk about them, they're the same people, the same mentalities. Very little has changed, as you can tell. But what has changed, and that's the sad part, back to what you asked before, is that the means of communication vis-a-vis the instruments, although there are many, many people out there playing instruments, I have no place to go with them. And they're being usurped by one man and his synthesizer. And there are no more clubs, few, but not very many, with a variety of music. One club, you know, that's the other thing, variety. There's no variety out there. There's either very, very bad traditional or very, very bad ultra-modern, whatever that means, both of which will bore you to tears, even in small doses. So the emotional impact of a single instrumentalist going out there is you know, doing his thing is a rare phenomenon. And I hate to say it, I mean, I would hate to see it vanish. But it's very possible, with the values of the world today, as we know it, to see this entire Western idea of culture, you know, from Bach on to the present day, go bye-bye. You know,
Fall prey to Blockbuster Video and a
Basically.
bag of microwave popcorn?
Sure, that's right. And a floppy disk. That's very possible.
I have a theory. I want you to expound on this. I don't think that's going to happen. You know why? I think the pendulum, no matter how negative we think, can only swing so far before young people of their own volition sit down one day, go to a library, pick up a Charlie Parker record, And now you got to let them think it's their discovery. I've discovered Charlie Parker.
Mm.
You know, and when they think it's their discovery and they think it's their peer group way of being hip,
Mm.
then I think quality will kind of reinvent itself and become part of the scenario, like you said.
Well, I hope that this is true. You know, not only for your sake, but for all of our sakes. You know, for people who love music, and practitioners and artists. You know, who have come to the height of a Charlie Parker. You know, phenomenal. But that type of phenomenon needs to be nurtured in a culture that digs what it is doing. And just for, although yes, jazz music was always a minor, I mean, a subculture. It was, you know, minor percentage of the population really knew. I mean, the so-called jazz age was not the jazz age at all. You know, big bands were not jazz. It was not jazz music. You know, great jazz soloists in those bands, but those were not. I don't care who wrote the charts. Thus the jam session was born. Bands would come into town. The guys were so drugged after night playing this SOS on the book, that they would find these little haunts and clubs and test their metal against each other by playing. You know, and that is the part that really is missing, and may remain missing forever, because the stuff, the clubs, the environment that spawned, you know, guys who could play, like, or the Roy Eldridges, you know, going against this guy and that guy, and Hawkins is against the Websters, and, you know, and all these different people, that doesn't exist anymore. You know, and so where are they going to do this? Even though jazz, like I said before, is an underground, and always was, a very, very small percentage of the population ever really got it. Period. And what you're saying is maybe some guy who's like the leader of his peer group, say, listen to that. Well, is he rediscovering Brahms, or is he rediscovering Offenbach? I mean, I don't see what you mean. It's a very obscure or obtuse correlation, but it does. Will he discover? Maybe he'll discover Rudy Wiedoeft instead of Charlie Parker. See, that could be the rub.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do see what you're saying.
Yeah, like Bach was overlooked for 100 years until Mendelssohn.
Mendelssohn.
Just found his music and brought it to the public, to the Leipzig Gewandhaus, you know. Prior to that, his music was buried, forgotten. His son's music was much more popular in the state than his own music, than the old man's music. So today, would you go, you know, well, all right, I think I've belabored that point enough.
Well, listen, I know that you all are going to perform yet again tonight, and I thought the performance that you all did last night was, some of my students were there for my history of jazz class, and
good.
I thought it was just simply a clinic. Everything that I've told them about, you guys did.
That's lovely to hear. I mean, that's nice. I mean, it makes us feel good that we lived up to your expectations of what you wanted them to experience. And that's what music is, really, isn't it, Mike? It's an experience. It's an emotional experience, like reading or looking at a painting. And either you have a penchant, a penchant for picking up on that, or you don't. I mean, you either get an emotional experience from it, or you don't.
I was going to talk to you about that too. You talked about an emotional experience, and you also you used before the word passion. You spoke about Louis Armstrong. You talked about passion, and the thing I would like to see, and I'd like you to talk about this, that I'd like to see come back even more so in jazz, is passion being pushed to the forefront, even more so than technique.
Technique.
You got to have some now. Yeah.
Technique is only good enough to execute an idea. If you have no ideas, then technique by itself is not music.
It's an etude.
It's not even that. It's not even as good as that. An etude at least has form and shape. But technique, how many notes you can cram into a bar is totally meaningless. One note, well placed at the right time, with the right intensity, is worth more than 1,000 notes played at a velocity that well, it's like fancy footwork, dazzling, you know. That's good for children. Children like to be dazzled, you know, they do. But mature people don't want to be dazzled. It's only unless it's to show a point or to say, or see, I can do that too. Yeah, but the technique only is good if technique is really nothing more than the execution of an idea. If you have no ideas, then you're just an array of cunning stunts.
How does a musician translate human experience into sound to get those ideas? Or how do you do it? How do you do it?
Well, I'm a composite of everything I've heard. Sponge. We're all sponges. All humanity is a sponge. Take a little from this guy, a little. Oh, that's beautiful. That. Okay. What it boils down to is, can you sing through your horn? Can you sing? Can you sustain a melody and make it beautiful without all the gibberish and nonsense and trying to show everybody how many notes you can play around the melodic theme? I mean, can you just state simply the bare essentials of a melody and make it convincing? You know, strip it to its bare essence. And Charlie Parker knew how to do that. Louis Armstrong knew how to do that. To name a few,
Yeah.
or a couple. So I don't know. There's so many wonderful musicians. I mean, really. I mean, if you hear Bix Beiderbecke play, I mean, he played magnificent. You hear Frankie Trumbauer play. There should be a musical reevaluation of what his influence was, because Lester Young, and Buddy Tate, and Eddie Barefield, and also Don Byas, all these guys that I knew, all doffed their caps to Frank Trumbauer, who was in Kansas City at the time. He operated out of St. Louis and Kansas City, the Muleback Hotel. They used to go listen to him. This is when Coleman Hawkins was still slap-tonguing. He was bending and slurring notes. And they all acknowledge him as probably the most influential. Prez took his sound from Frankie Trumbauer's C melody saxophone.
Am I correct in saying that by nature, the C sax spoke a little softer than the tenor or the alto?
Absolutely, absolutely. I've played C sax, as you call it, the melody, C melody saxophone. But it is a C tenor. If you look at the chart, you know, stuff from contrabass saxophone, bass saxophone to, and it says baritone saxophone, E flat, then B flat, then tenor, B flat tenor, and then just above it, tenor in C, melody, and then E flat, alto, F mezzo saxophone, etc. However, there are two ways of playing that instrument. You can use an alto mouthpiece or a very small, old-fashioned auto-link tenor mouthpiece. With that, if you use the chambers are the same as a C melody. You know, alto mouthpiece will get a Prez-like sound, which was Prez's first instrument, was a C melody. And if you use the old-fashioned link mouthpieces like Ben Webster used to use, you get this Hawkins type sound vis-a-vis the Ramblers, when Hawkins recorded in Holland for the Second World War with the Dutch group called the Ramblers. He made his most rhapsodic, romantic statements with that band. You've heard them, you know, Netch's Dream and things like that. Wonderful, wonderful tracks. that will come out on a C melody. It is a very versatile instrument that way. But once again, I was talking to Sonny Rollins about it years ago, and it has no carrying power.
Mm-hmm.
It is truly, I mean, you may sit there and it's very comfortable to play, and you may love it. You know, you get all kinds of nice things. You hold it up this way. It doesn't carry. And that's probably why it went out of popularity. Also, the key is not really conducive to, I mean, unless you like to play in C sharp and F sharp and B and G flat, I mean, things like that.
Yep. Those are some really tasty insights. And another thing that you've talked about how one player influences another.
Yeah.
That I think is important. Do you know of players that you've influenced?
Yeah, but the thing is this, Mike. I mean, let's put it this way. There are people who have very strong, if your style is, if you are stylistically strong, there's a very good possibility you may have no followers and and influence no one, because it's, if your things are unique in that way. I mean, unless you are truly a revolutionary vis-a-vis Charlie Parker, vis-a-vis Louis Armstrong. But in Louis, the difference between Louis and Charlie Parker was that everyone that tried to play like Louis Armstrong, you could take 20 guys and they all sounded different.
Uh-huh.
Even like guys like Rex Stewart told me, dressed like Louis, walked like Louis, try to play like Louis, still sound like Rex Stewart. Roy, you name him. Roy always thought that, well, that's another influence. But I mean, all these different people, Doc Cheatham, blah, 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 they all, Harry James, really very diversified cast of characters all claim that they were influenced by Louis Armstrong, but they all sounded so different and unique in their own way. Fine. Charlie Parker, however, everyone that ever tried to be influenced by Charlie Parker ended up by sounding like him. To the point where I heard some early Sonny Stitt recordings, I couldn't tell the difference. I really, what's this? What is what my Charlie Parker happened to her? And turned out to Sonny Stitt. Of course, I'd never heard it by Charlie Parker, because it was Sonny Stitt. But, so, is this good or bad? I mean, to be able to emulate somebody but be stuck in their crypt, so to speak, is not good. You see, then you never get your voice. But to emulate somebody and come out with your own little thing involved with it is another ball game again.
To emulate to the point just of discovery.
Correct, but not mockery or you know, whatever the word is.
Like the Elvis impersonators. That's a macabre scenario.
But don't laugh. It's just as macabre in jazz life too. To see all these Charlie Parker clones come out. Did you ever hear the guys? Where they guys who try to emulate Louis, where Armstrong is, when they really fail is when they try to do the vocalizations. Then it becomes a travesty.
Yes.
See, it's like the Elvis. That's where they fail. Unless they just use their own natural voice. I mean,
Right.
if you want to quote that like Ethel Waters did, well, I can't give you anything but Love Baby, where she actually does scat Louis' chorus, you know, she'd get away with it. Why? Because she was one of the founding, without her there'd be no female vocalists in the big bands. She set the whole stage from whence they all came. Whether you had a Mildred Bailey or Billie Holiday, or you name them, they all came out of Ethel Waters. She was the grand dame of how the female vocal should sound. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes a lot of sense. We are going to have to move here because I know that we got to wrap up this interview, but I've enjoyed talking to you. You've given us some marvelous insights. Say something to our young people about going into this music. If they find themselves as music majors in universities now, what are they going to have to face? And how to face it?
A lack, you're going to, you poor guys are going to find that you'll have no place to practice your art. And you're going to have to create it. And I don't know if there's enough initiative to create it. That after you've learned certain things, how are you going to, and where are you going to release this and test this, test your metal and test what your knowledge and test your feelings, and where are you going to display this? If you have no place to display this, then it becomes nothing more than a phonograph memory, which is very sad. I know. I'm not exactly a bundle of enthusiasm when it comes to mapping out what would be a future for anyone that comes and studies music seriously. But if you study music seriously, you will have gained something personally inside, whether or not you ever become a practitioner or just a part-time practitioner or whatever. It doesn't matter. The fact is, you will have gained something that will be something that you could keep within yourself lifelong if it grabs you. And that's it. I mean, there's no other way I can think of. I can't say, oh, it's a great life out there. It's a wonderful field. Just there are millions of opportunities. Just graduate and hands will pick you up and snap you into the band. You go on the road and see the world.
Oh, it's like, what's wrong with this picture?
End.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for being with us. All right.